Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast, where we celebrate filmmaking, storytelling and cinema across the island of Ireland. So whether you're a diehard film fan or simply curious about the screen industries, make sure to subscribe so you can catch up on past conversations with creatives like Neil Arden Uplev. He's the director of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and actor Colin McIvor. Today's podcast has been made possible with the support of Fictionalising, Screen Ireland Stakeholders Fund. And in this episode, we're delighted to welcome Colin McIvor to talk about his exciting new feature, No Ordinary Heist, which is in cinemas on the 27th of March. So have a listen to the trailer here.
You're in a position of responsibility. Anyone could distract you and snatch those keys. Stop, Jesus Christ!
Oh, God, no. This will be a very swift operation. You will evade security, fill 3 cages with cash, and bring them to us. And here's the clever bit. Not one of my men will set foot inside the bank. Your job is to keep each other's loved ones alive.
Give the gang what they want and away they go.
We call, you answer. Feel, she dies.
Get your arse down there.
What if you can't get them what they want?
Do you not have faith in your husband, Mrs. Murray?
Not always.
I hear you.
What did you say? Did you tell him?
Go, go, go! What are you doing?
Report of activity at the Northern Bank.
You want more cash? Are you listening to me?
I'm gonna need to see you inside the bag.
So thanks so much for chatting with us.
No problem. You're welcome.
We're so delighted to have you, and it's lovely to see you again. We were just at the Capital Irish Film Festival in Washington, which was brilliant fun. Have you recovered from that?
Yes, it was great. It's my second film that was out there, so it was lovely to go back and see the old faces, and I'm sure they thought the same of myself. So, but no, it's great, and it's a massive following out there for Irish cinema. So to be privileged enough to have your film play in such a beautiful sort of retro theatre as well was just incredible, as you know yourself with your short films. So no, it was great.
Oh, it's lovely. And you were on a bit of a festival tour. So it has been a complete whirlwind. So we're really appreciative of you taking the time in terms of, you were jet setting off from there to Glasgow. Now you're on press tours with everything lined up. How have you found that so far? Has it been different from, your other 2 features?
Yeah, it's the press element is much bigger on No Ordinary Heist, probably because of the sort of the true story, the political aspect. Not that we go into the politics in the film at all, but I'd say that aspect is bigger. Zoo had a lovely run around the festivals as well. We'll probably go to VOD sooner than we did with Zoo, but the scale of it seems like it's amped up quite a bit on this one.
To be exhausted, but we really appreciate you chatting. And I was just wondering if you can give us a brief synopsis of the film and what people can expect when they watch it.
Yeah, so it's based on it's inspired by the 2004 Northern Bank robbery, which is a true story. It was the largest cash heist in British and Irish history at the time. And it was a tiger kidnapping where the gang took 2 separate families hostage, and both of which had a family member who worked in the bank, and they were forced to carry out a robbery under a ticking clock and the barrel of a gun, unfortunately. So it's very much inspired by that. After making Zoo, I was looking for another project that had historical resonance, and this was one that was always in my mind. I actually passed the bank the morning after the robbery when it was all cordoned off, and it was always in the back of my mind as something that was pretty cinematic. And in particular, as I read more about it, again, not the political fallout or the people involved, but the 2 men who were forced to do what they did. I just thought there's an incredible story of human spirit. To the 2 guys in a pressure cooker of terror, really, being forced to get the money out under security, under the gaze of security, and right in the center of Belfast, right before Christmas. So it just had all the elements, in my opinion, to make something pretty thrilling.
It is incredibly thrilling. I could feel people when I was watching it in the cinema squirm with discomfort, and there was, that feeling of tension. It As a viewer, it's something that's so dramatic in terms of it isn't just a kind of bog standard kind of heist film in the sense where, the stakes are there from the beginning. It's life and death of these complex characters, and there's such conflict in the marriages, in the in their relationship, in the existence of the bank, and it's very timely. But I'll kind of delve into this film. What I really want to do is dig into you and your career first, and what brought you into this point. So I know you did a number of short films in the past. I know you've worked in commercials before, starting, this is your third feature now. I was just wondering if you could tell me about your start into the industry.
Yeah, that's a way back. I mean, I went to art college and I was determined to be a graphic designer. In fact, I had interviews with my portfolio in my hand, and 1995 came along, and that was the year of, I hope I'm right on that, 95. Lehian was a French cinema movie that just blew my mind. Heat came out, Pulp Fiction, I think possibly even Forrest Gump. That was just a year of the most incredible cinema. And I just found myself really, Lehian in particular, really drew me in as an art form that I'd never looked at cinema in that way before. It's black and white, and just the way it's shot and the reality of it, and the score, just everything about it. And then what happened was I also happened to venture onto the set of a short film that was being shot in Belfast. And it blew my mind to see these grown adults pushing a dolly along and filming, and there was actors. James Nesbitt was in it. There was actors up on a ledge, and I just looked at the world of these adults, makeup and hair, and the focus pullers, and just thought, wow, this is actually behind the scenes of how these things are made. And back then, I thought a director operated the camera, did all that sort of stuff. So I was so green to it. But anyway, so I started writing screenplays at that point, and I got very, very lucky. The very, very, very first thing I put on paper was a short film called Gun, a teenage suicide story, very much in the vein of, I suppose, like Lehian and stuff like that. And it got picked up by the Nerve Centre in Derry, and they went out and shot it for like 90 grand, which for a short film is just mind blowing. So I ended up getting meetings with BBC, RT, and the likes afterwards. So that was me off and running, and then made a few of my own funded shorts, did very well, and lifted awards, got TV screenings and stuff, and then found myself directing TV commercials for a living.
And in between that period, so, you started off as a graphic designer, which obviously is, your artistic, your rule of thirds, the importance of that visual image, and I presume are a visual thinker, or, was that, something that you were just in?
Yeah, I always say to people, writing for me is a means to an end. The directing and the visual is what intrigues me. I watch films obviously for the storytelling as well, but I would like to think, I have a keen eye on sort of lensing and composition and stuff like that. And so it's the visual is very much, the aesthetic of it is very, very important to me as well. And on No Ordinary Heist in particular, we went out of our way to really find these authentic locations that not only served a purpose, but they are a character. It was really important that the bank was like a war-in of corridors, and then the vault that we found incredibly in Dublin, it's a claustrophobic, Victorian hellhole basically, and so that's the whole aesthetic of it is very much important to me.
And that's amazing. So you started off, working shorts, and I mean that is a big success to be kind of catapulted in to like your first project being kind of a 90 grand short film at a time when, not many short films were being made. What were the skills at this point that you knew you were working on or that you were developing? And then in terms of what was the step then between that and getting to direct your first project? What was sort of the toolkit that you were working into?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was the short films. I made 2 or 3 short films that, as I say, did very well in terms of awards and on TV. And at the same time, I was making TV commercials. So then a scheme appeared through MI Screen, which was like a micro budget feature. And I knew very quickly they wanted me to direct one of the projects. I didn't write it. And I debated that back and forth, to be honest, a fair bit, and eventually felt, look, this is putting a feature under your belt is, and it's only now when you look back on it that you go, once you get that first feature under your belt, it's almost irrelevant as to what it is or what it was. Obviously the more success, the better, but it's really just a validation of you as someone who other people will put money behind to make a feature. So again, it's just I'm sure a lot of filmmakers will say there's a lot of luck involved in being in the right place at the right time. I was actually working in a cinema projecting films on 35mm when I got the call from the executive producer of MI Screen to say, we'd very much like you to consider directing this. I was sent the script, and as I say, I just wasn't sure. It wasn't quite my bag at that time, but just right place, the right time.
The commercial work then, it's an interesting aspect. I was wondering if you could talk about, like your beginnings. How did that, because they're very much so interwoven in terms of, like visual storytelling, practicing elements, and you're so confined in terms of, like it's a short piece. You have to get as much information across as possible. So I was just wondering if you can kind of talk about how work starting off in that industry and then making a name for yourself through that as well.
Yeah, I mean, commercials are very much maligned. That they are, as an art form, they are looked upon as a thing that you skip past in the ad break. But for me, they were a great grounding, as you say, in terms of storytelling. It's telling a story in 3 seconds, as opposed to in a short film or a movie in 30 seconds or 3 minutes. It's learning the importance of performance and the power of a glance or an expression. So commercials, I've been very proud of my background in commercials, and I still work in commercials to this day. It's something that I'll never turn my back on. So it's as a discipline, I would highly recommend it. And as I say, I think there's the drama world out there maybe think, in fact, I've had conversations with producers where they go, oh, you get so much money to make 30 seconds, we'll give you that same amount of money for half an hour of TV. How are you going to do it? And if anything, I say, look, that's the point, is if I can do it in 30 seconds, then, you can see what I can expand up into. So commercials were a great grounding, or still are a great grounding.
What are the types of budgets that you have worked on? Like specifically No Ordinary Heist is a period film. Your other film had animals in it.
Yeah.
Like possibly the hardest things to shoot. In terms of the resources that are there, like, and maybe don't be specific because I know you're probably NDA'd up to the gills, but like roughly what would you be looking at and what would you be expected to deliver?
Yeah, I mean, both Zoo and No Ordinary Heist were in around the 3 million mark, sterling stroke euros. But look, you never have enough. It's never ever enough. No matter what you have, you're always looking for more time, more filming days, more money, bigger crowd scenes and stuff like that. So I think that, around that mark, 2.5 to 3 million is a very common independent sort of film level, just above the sort of micro budget level. So yeah, it's one of those things, any of my producers will tell you I very rarely talk to them about budget and money, because it's just beating your head against the wall, because it sort of doesn't matter. If I got a phone call today saying there's a £10 million budget for such and such, I know it's not going to be enough, so it's because a lot of it goes to sort of things that, aren't really tangible, it's sort of fees and actors' fees and stuff like that, that of course are the important elements on the screen. But yeah, budget's not something I overly, unless it's sort of ridiculous, if I have projects in development that, that have been talked about at a budget level where I know now from my experience that no, you would need to cut 20 pages off the script, take out all those crowd scenes, all that sort of stuff, isn't going to work on that level. So again, it's just a good discipline to know, but don't get hung up on your budget, and it's not a measure of success, I don't think either, because some of the best films are made on lower budgets, and
I think probably the most universal marker of success is like how much did it cost versus how much it took in. So something that takes in the same amount that it made, no matter what it is, like, even if it's a critical success, like that is, I think that's what even though it's wrong, if people enjoyed it, that's ultimately what it is. But that's probably the marker. In terms then of, you're working on commercials, you've now moved up into features after, shooting that first feature, after working in commercials and after working in shorts. Because I presume there is an element of you're stretching your budget a lot more and trying to get a lot more than you were with definitely in 90 grand, but I suppose you were writing on that, a short, but if commercials as well. What would have been your experience? Was there a learning curve in terms of, your own skill development at this point, or did you find it just like a big long short film?
Moving into features from shorts. Yeah, I'm just trying to think back how I process what was involved. I mean, I guess it's like everything, if you've got a 3-day short, or a 30-day feature, you still have those scenes that you need to get in your day. You try to keep your page count down. You try to be realistic about the time that the actors need for performance. So I just think when you step up into features, and I know that's like the holy grail for directors, is oh God, what was that like jumping up to that level? It's sort of the same thing every day. It's just a fight against the clock and against, the conditions, so I didn't really, at the end of my first feature, I didn't find myself going, oh my God, that learning curve was, bent back on itself. I think there was an element of me where I thought, I have to be aware of stamina. That's quite a big thing. You're the leader of the gang, basically, and you can't hide from that. So if you're not up for the fight and willing to sort of push through the barriers, then the rest will fall down around you, so I'd say that's probably the biggest thing that I took away from my first feature, is that you've got to get up every morning and fight the good fight, and hopefully your crew follows you, and I think that is something that, and hopefully the crew from all my features will say, is that we try to do it in a sort of very civilized, low key sort of way. There's no barkers, there's no shouters, we don't need any of that on set. So, but yeah, I mean, the step up is in your mind massive, but it's still shooting. You're still shooting a scene, or a couple of scenes a day or whatever, So it's, it's just ticking off pages. The best bit of my day every single day is ripping off a page of sides and binning it, knowing that we've shot that scene. So, that's how I approach it.
And then in terms of, say, Zoo, you were in development for a really long time and you also wrote it. I was wondering, in terms then of, being attached to a project versus, you being the kind of origin of the project. And I presume, having to push further and do more work in terms of, getting financing in place. And, that 3 million mark is trickier to get because it is just multiple sources required.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if you could tell me about the elements of that, because I presume as well, like you're pitching this as an idea and people are like, it sounds amazing, but animals?
Yeah. Zoo was a colossal challenge, to be honest. Animals and kids, the old cliche, you just never work with them. But I had been working with kids quite a bit. I found myself, not by design, working with kids in commercials quite a bit. And one of my shorts that was very successful was with a young kid. I think she was maybe only 7 at the time, so that in a weird way, it didn't really daunt me working with the kids. The animals was just one of those, the elephants in particular was one of those things where that they would look after themselves. We had this dream that would be able to bring an elephant to Belfast and fill them to our heart's content, like the way U2 did with their video back in the day, the music video. But we very quickly realized we had to move the mountain to Mohammed, and all of us head out to Canada to work around the elephant out there, or the elephants out there. So that they were, actually, to be honest, the joke was the elephant was the most predictable thing on set. It was it was weird how well they were behaved, and the relationship that the elephant built up with Art Parkinson in particular was just a phenomenon. I mean, the trainers that were there were like, we've just never seen our elephant sort of become attached so quickly. But yeah, I mean, I had a funny moment actually with Richard Williams from NI Screen in an airport on the way back from, I think it might have been Cannes, where we had just finished Zoo. I think we had just finished Zoo, and he said, "I always loved that story, Colin, and I loved the idea of it, but I just thought, how will you ever make that?" So it's only in moments like that where you realize, people sort of are going, is he off his head? How is he going to manage that?
And I love that you're creating content, but, aimed at different audiences and still very strong. Is, as Zoo is coming out again after, developing it for such a long time, in terms of your slate, do you have like a big pool of projects that you're attached to and that your ideas that you're developing to a certain point at any one time? Or, are you do you press go when the green button is pressed?
No, it fluctuates up and down. Obviously, at the minute, I'm getting sent a lot of material because just the old cliche of, you're hot just before your filling comes out, So there's a lot on my desktop at the moment that I'm looking at and talking to people about. But, a year or two could go by and, the odd project will drop off, and that's either I decide not to keep working at it, or for whatever reason that we go our separate ways with different things. So I guess what I've learned certainly over the last couple of years is, because of how long it takes to get your projects up and running, you really have to like the project, and you have to really know that you've got good producers, because at the end of the day, there's only so far you can push it. Those producers have to go out and actually gather up the pennies, and that's where they're worth their weight in gold. So yeah, I mean, I'd say I've got probably 5, 6, 7 projects that are at all different stages. A couple of them I've written myself, others that have come in at the moment, but that could easily get whittled down in the next couple of years to 1 or 2.
So then, in terms of, I want to kind of spend a lot of time on No Ordinary Heist. So just to kind of continue on from that element of, projects in development and projects in slate, like where you are now, are there things that you're sort of planning for, hoping for? Do you, again, you've kind of worked successfully in so many areas. After, you've finished something that maybe is more family friendly, and I know you did the BBC series, do you get more of a graw to, to stress the tension and the politics more? Or is it a case of you've delivered on one and you kind of hit your groove?
Yeah, I mean, the projects I have ahead of me are very diverse, to be honest, and they're sort of they're it's a mixture from like psychological horrors to period dramas with a nun who runs away from a convent to I mean, I'm talking at the moment with about another project, which is another Irish story of 2 boys, so that they're all very diverse, and there's no genre, if you know what I mean, that I go after. I mean, I have my go-to sort of references that that I always that got me into cinema, like Laheen, as I say, or Stand By Me, or movies like that. But I don't have like a set genre that I go after.
And that, I think that leads us very nicely into No Ordinary Heist in terms of one of the elements to it one of the most striking things about it is the depth of the writing, the depth of the characters, the depth of the world. I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit about, your first, like when you first saw this as a film.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, whenever 2004, I passed the bank robbery the next morning, and it was just something that was percolating in my mind for years since then. And after I made Zoo, and I saw the response to people who enjoyed the historical element to it, I thought, maybe No Ordinary Heist is the one to, really push next and get it up on its feet. But I had other things in development as well at the time. But that was the one that sort of kept catching people's ear. It was funny when I would pitch it when I was, in the States or whatever, at different festivals. The Yanks would always say, "How's that not a movie? How's that?" You know what I mean? So I knew there was something there. And when I wrote the first draft myself before hooking up with Aisling Corstein, my co-writer, and I put the first draft into a competition in London, a micro budget competition, and it got through like 3 rounds, and it was like a vomit draft, So as I say, I knew there was something to it, and then brought Aisling on board, and she just, helped, knock it into shape. So,
and what's that back and forth then like in terms of workflow and finding the story? Like, what would you say both of you bring to what the script is now?
Yeah, well, what I loved about Aisling's work was that she'd been sending me scripts for a couple of years before. We actually hooked up, and I loved her. She's better than just this, but she had a really good ear for domesticity, domestic sort of writing, the relationships of families and stuff. And I thought, that is something that, I could really make use of, because I felt like my writing was maybe a little bit more Hollywood, you know what I mean? So to bring someone in with a grounding like that Aisling has, really worked, and we just sparked off each other at that point. And I said, look, Aisling, I've not a penny in the pot, but if you come on board with me, down the line, we might make a film together. So she was all in with me, and we basically wrote it over Zoom. I met Aisling for the very first time on set. I met in person, which was crazy, So it just worked really well, and we broke the script up into, hey, say we got notes from producers or financiers or whatever, we would just literally say, which scene do you want to have a crack at? And then we would mark each other's homework, with no ego, no. But if one of us wanted to veto something in terms of, I really don't think that works, I don't like that, then it just came out, and whether that was me said it or she said it, that's how it worked. But it just worked brilliantly, and I hope to, I'm in development with a project of hers that she's writing alone at the moment. And I just really hope that comes together.
Fabulous, because I think that is the thing. The stakes are there, but that grounding in the depth of those relationships really make them so much more tangible, rather than, someone being this very heightened version that you don't identify with. And it's so concise, because this is very much so an ensemble piece, I would say, between your 2 leads, obviously, and Éanna and Eddie together, and there's that great conflict and tension. But even in terms of Michelle and, their round of words as well, she's there, but Mags, she plays Mags, the security guard, and, everyone has an arc. Everyone has stakes on the table that are really going to so they're really fighting. So it's one of the best, I think, instances I've ever seen of how rounded everything is. And then what I would say as a viewer, in terms of the depth of how it's layered with that financial issue, that ticking time bomb, that fiscal pressure. And I think that specifically is the element, class versus privilege versus, the base people on the chopping block as the layoffs come in. It was all of that just ratchets it up. So there's, we're not ever watching action for action's sake, but you're on side with everyone, which makes the whole thing that much more exciting as you're in. But even in terms of that depth and that theme about money, was that something that was consciously maneuvered through it, or was it just something that just sat well and worked?
When you mention money, the the fact that it's all built around a robbery? Is that
No, but it's the element around how everyone is about to be laid off, and in
okay?
terms of
Yes,
like every single person's personal livelihood is at stake.
yeah,
And I think that's the element that just brings it so timely, because that is very much so where we are now. That the
yeah,
crisis of living, it is the thing that makes it very much so now, how transactional people who've worked their whole life for a company, how transactionally they're cast aside, and what is money. And and then you have that in a conceptual way, with the bank is doing it in one way, is going, yeah, we want money, so we're human beings don't matter, and then the criminals are doing it, so it's just really well interwoven.
yeah. It was one of those the whole redundancy thing was the bank was in the process of being taken over back then by Australia Bank. And Ashley and I just felt that there's going to be, a bit of drama involved in that, is my job safe and all the rest, So we didn't actually delve too much into it, to the reality of what went on at that time, but we just worked on the assumption that some people would be laid off and stuff. And it just it just layered in another level of strata that we just felt was nice. There's a lot of jeopardy. There's actually scenes that we cut out of the end of the film where the Richard character, the boss, goes to Mag's house and discovers that her husband is actually now in a wheelchair and, is unable to work, So it really, it brought home the fact that Mags really does need her job, But we just felt after the robbery, the film was done, so it just felt extraneous. So, but yeah, I mean, I Ashley might tell you otherwise, but it was never really money as a theme was never really something that was foremost in my mind. But now that you've pointed it out, we're happy to claim the credit for the whole.
But like that, it's you're getting it sort of from all sides. That's so well, and then the strata things. So like the how Eddie's character comes from such privilege, and anyway, but I won't explain your own film to you. Tell me about the casting.
Yeah, we got so lucky with our cast. Absolutely incredible. They were real actors. Eddie came on the radar as someone who was keen to do it, and looked at his body of work, and it speaks for itself. Éanna was just a diamond. He was a rising star. Met up with him in Stephen's Green in Dublin, and we just walked around together talking about the film. And I knew he was our guy. And then once I realized I'd got a guy from Cork and a guy from London, I thought I should really populate the rest of the roles as much as possible with Northern Irish authentic voices, So,
and my untrained ear was very impressed by accents.
Good, yeah. Well, the accents was a big thing, and Eddie in particular worked very, very hard to sort of find the accent, because Northern Irish accent isn't a very difficult one to nail. But no, we just got really lucky. I worked with Michelle on my first project, so I was so pleased when she remembered me and was willing to do it. Eva is just incredible. And yeah, Andrea, the mother as well, we just got really lucky across the board, and everyone come on the set and they knew what they were doing. It was sort of like I very rarely had to talk about tone or anything like that. They all just seem to come and hit their marks. We just got lucky.
I think that's it. It's just deep on so many levels. I have two more questions, if that's okay. So the final one will be, what do you hope people take away? But I think because we have covered the audiences, and even sitting in it, you can feel that tension. It's so visceral, but it's so deep. I think it's just, if you don't like heist films, you will like this film. If you don't like things that are layered with emotional drama and you like action, you would also like this film. I think it just sits so well across all of those different spectrums. But in terms of finding the beat of the pacing, so you mentioned cutting out that scene, which is a core element to an arc, and you've obviously sat down with these really brilliant characters for a while. Were there many darlings that had to be killed? Were you working with a test audience in terms of because there's moments of almost sometimes it's almost funny, there's moments of how the interpersonal conflicts turn comedic, you know, like or relatable almost, and then other times and there's brevity, even beats where Eddie is dealing with his higher ups, and it's like, who gives a shit at this point in time, and that kind of like, but there's just kind of all of that is sort of woven through it. So you've moments of like a breath, and then you've moments of like, oh my god, I really need them to do it, and the stakes just keep rising.
Yeah. I look, everything you said there, Gemma, is fantastic, and I so appreciate that those are the elements that you've spotted. But yeah, we would do we obviously shot the entire script, which was probably it was maybe about 100 pages, maybe 97. So it was all shot. But what we would do in the edit was myself and John Walters, incredible editor. We would every so often go in and go across each of the scenes and just find a way to get out quicker. So don't answer that question. When Eddie gets asked something, let's try where he just puts the phone down, or let's, just to leave everyone literally hanging, like wondering what's going to happen next. So we did put a lot of work into trying to make it as lean as physically possible. We took a big old scene out at the beginning, a domestic scene as well. And as I say, a couple of scenes off the end where there was a little bit of a coda. We even had a scene with the two lads sitting on a park bench afterwards talking about the event. But as I say, once the robbery happened, we all took a look at it, and we did test screen it, and it scored incredibly well, which was terrifying, but it got great scores. But watching it in the big screen with an audience, we did ourselves start to see that, we could trim here, we could trim there. So the trimming aspect of it was important. In terms of the little, flashes of humor and stuff like that. I mean, there is a very dark humor in the North anyway. Just having grown up through the Troubles and stuff, we have a gallows humor. So I did want to keep a little bit of that in, but we also, we try to trim back on any of the sort of Eddie, by his very nature at times, when he does his little run and stuff, can be quite comedic, because of his gait. So we went in to try and keep that at a minimum, so it wouldn't undercut the rising tension. And Paddy Jenkins is known up here as he's a superstar up here as a comic actor. Even with Paddy, who again came on set, knew exactly what was required, but has a natural humor to him. So it was about curtailing that. And that wasn't me necessarily. He himself was aware that, he's in a security guard role. There is a little bit of a comic element to it, but ultimately he still has to have a threat. He still has to be a threat to the two lads. So that was the process. And what I love about the comments that we've got about the tension is you literally can't write the word tension on your script. Well, you can, and the reader can read the word tension, but until you put the thing together and we had an incredible score created by Phil Kieran, until you put all the elements together and people actually respond to it, you just don't know what you've got, So as you heard in Washington and Glasgow and Dublin, the repeated one was tension, it was like it was such a tense watch, So that's the bit we're most delighted about.
And finally, when people leave the cinema, what do you hope they take with them with this film?
Do you know what? I've been asked this question a few times, and all I would say is I just really hope we've delivered something, a gripping sort of old-fashioned crime thriller that sort of, leaves a little bit of a lasting permanence in the mind, that hopefully word of mouth will travel and other people will say, you've whether you're into heist movies or not, as you say, or crime or thriller, this is something that, will definitely leave a little bit of an imprint there. That's the goal.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for chatting with us. And we'll look forward to seeing it on the big screen.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening. So make sure to subscribe to Film Ireland wherever you get your podcasts.